The deafening roar of the engines filled the cabin as Flight WX-407, a sleek white commercial jet, soared above the clouds. Passengers were quietly chatting, scrolling through their devices and sipping beverages, completely unaware that a crisis was unfolding behind the calm facade of the cabin. Up in the cockpit, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Captain Richard Hayes, a seasoned pilot with over 15 0 flight hours, was slumped over the controls, unconscious. His face was pale, lips slightly bluish, and his hands had gone limp. First Officer Elena Morales quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Her co-pilot was incapacitated mid-flight at 35,000 feet over a region where the nearest airport was more than 300 miles away. Elena, though experienced, had never handled a situation like this alone. The flight deck felt claustrophobic. The humming of the engines, the constant blinking of cockpit lights, and the endless expanse of clouds outside made her heart race. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she called over the radio, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every repetition. The air traffic controllers responded instantly, their calm voices a stark contrast to the chaos inside the jet. "Flight WX-407, this is the Northern Air Traffic Control. We read you. What's your situation?" "Elena Morales, First Officer. Captain is unconscious. I am taking control, but I need immediate instructions. We're at 35,000 feet, 480 knots, heading north," she responded, trying to maintain composure. Within seconds, the emergency response protocol kicked into action. Radar screens lit up, showing the aircraft deviating from its planned flight path. Fighter jets were scrambled from the nearest military base. Two sleek F-22 Raptors, their metallic frames glinting under the sun, accelerated down the runway and took off, leaving behind trails of white vapor as they climbed to intercept the stricken jet. Meanwhile, Elena's hands were sweating as she gripped the yoke. She had memorized the manual procedures for emergency situations, but nothing could fully prepare someone for taking full control of a commercial jet midair with an unconscious captain beside them. She toggled the autopilot, engaged the heading hold, and attempted to stabilize the aircraft. Alarms continued to beep intermittently, each one triggering a spike of fear in her chest. She could hear the faint cries and anxious whispers of passengers as the turbulence increased. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing a temporary issue, but we are taking all measures to ensure your safety," she announced, her voice shaking slightly but resolute. A few passengers gasped audibly, some clutched their armrests while others prayed silently. Outside, the F-22 pilots identified the aircraft on their radar and began a careful approach. The mission was delicate. Any sudden maneuver could worsen the situation. Captain Marcus Reynolds, leading the escort, radioed Elena, his voice calm yet commanding. "Flight WX-407, this is Air Force Command. We have fighters on your tail. Follow our instructions precisely. We will guide you safely to the nearest emergency landing strip." Elena nodded, though the pilot couldn't see her, and acknowledged. She tried to remain focused on the instruments, following the precise altitude, speed, and heading adjustments relayed by the fighter jets. The massive expanse of clouds below hid the ground from view, and the thought of landing a commercial jet under these circumstances was terrifying. Every bump, every sudden pitch of the aircraft made her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, concentrating on the immediate task. Meanwhile, in the cabin crew moved efficiently, trying to calm passengers. Flight attendants reassured everyone that the crew was in control, though their own nerves were visibly frayed. A mother clutched her young son, whispering comfort while trying to distract herself from the fear creeping in. Others stared at the overhead screens, where altitude and speed fluctuated, a visual reminder of the precarious situation. Back in the cockpit, Elena faced a new challenge. The captain's oxygen mask had dislodged. She leaned over to secure it, careful not to disturb the controls, and quickly assessed his vital signs. Stable but unconscious, she muttered to herself. She knew that keeping him alive until the landing was critical. Outside, the fighter jets moved into position, forming a protective wedge around the commercial jet. Their presence was both reassuring and daunting. The passengers had no idea these military jets were shadowing their plane, but their skilled pilots were doing everything to guide Elena. Communication lines between the Air Force and air traffic control were buzzing, with every second critical. The next 20 minutes were a test of nerve, precision, and raw courage. Elena maneuvered the aircraft through shifting air currents, following the fighter jet's lead. Each command from the Raptor pilots was executed with meticulous attention. The distance to the emergency airstrip slowly decreased. Elena's hands were raw from gripping the yoke. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She had never imagined a day like this, yet her resolve never wavered. As the jet finally broke through the cloud layer, the runway became visible below, a ribbon of tarmac stretching across the earth. Relief washed over her for a brief second, but the hardest part was yet to come, the landing. The fighter jets adjusted formation to guide the descent, and Elena prepared for the most critical maneuver of her life. The runway stretched ahead like a thin silver line, glinting in the sunlight that pierced through scattered clouds. Elena Morale's hands were tight on the yoke, knuckles white, heart hammering with every passing second. The fighter jets flanking the commercial jet had shifted positions, their formation precise and intimidating. They were her guide, her guardians, and the only link between life and catastrophe at this altitude. WX-407, reduce speed to 250 knots. Prepare for gradual descent. Maintain heading 045. Keep wings level, came the voice of Captain Reynolds over the secure radio channel. His calm, professional tone contrasted sharply with the storm of fear inside Elena's mind. Yes, understood. Reducing speed to 250, heading 045, wings level. She responded, her voice steadier now. She adjusted the throttles, feeling the engine's response as the plane began to slow, its massive bulk resisting the change like a reluctant giant. The vibrations from the airframe reverberated through her body, reminding her that the aircraft had its own will, its own momentum, and she had to coax it gently yet decisively. Inside the cabin, the tension was palpable. Flight attendants moved quietly, almost surgically, ensuring that seat belts were tight, trays secured, and everyone remained calm. Passengers clutched their seats, knuckles white, eyes wide. A young woman pressed her forehead against the window, staring at the clouds racing beneath them, while an elderly man muttered prayers under his breath, holding tightly to the hand of his spouse. The cabin lights flickered intermittently, adding to the sense of drama, while the seatbelt signs blinked relentlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. We are descending towards an emergency landing. Your cooperation is vital. Elena's voice echoed through the intercom, laced with a firmness that masked the adrenaline surging inside her. She glanced at the captain, still unconscious, still pale, and reminded herself that she had to do this not only for herself but for the 408 souls aboard. Above, the fighter jets guided her with military precision. The Raptors adjusted their positions, signaling altitude changes and banking angles with rapid hand gestures and synchronized maneuvers visible even from Elena's cockpit. She matched their movements, interpreting the gestures as if the jets themselves were extensions of her nervous hands. Suddenly, turbulence hit like a punch to the gut. The aircraft pitched sharply, and Elena had to react instinctively. She corrected the angle, fighting against the inertia, focusing on stabilizing the plane while keeping it aligned with the approaching runway. The jet shuddered, groaned, and the cabin erupted in anxious murmurs. The fighter jets didn't flinch. They remained perfectly poised, offering visual cues and subtle guidance through the chaos. WX-407, maintain current glide slope. Do not overcorrect. You're doing fine, Reynolds encouraged. Elena exhaled, a small wave of relief mixed with renewed determination. She was following instructions to the letter, but there was no margin for error. Every adjustment, every throttle movement, every slight push or pull on the yoke could mean the difference between a safe landing and disaster. Back in the cabin, passengers began to notice something unusual. A sudden, precise alignment of the jet despite the turbulent descent. Whispers of curiosity mixed with tension. Some had never seen such skill or coordination, unaware that two of the world's most advanced fighter jets were escorting them, guiding the stricken plane with split-second precision. A teenage boy pressed his face against the glass. Why? Died as the distant runway grew closer, each second stretching into eternity. Elena focused on the instruments, the visual cues from the fighters, and the runway now breaking clearly through the cloud layer. The landing gear indicator lit up. She engaged the mechanisms, feeling the vibration and subtle shift as the massive wheels extended. A warning light blinked, and she immediately toggled the hydraulics, ensuring the gears were locked. Her mind raced. If anything failed at this point, the consequences would be catastrophic, but she forced herself to breathe, to remain methodical. WX 407, you are aligned. Descend 500 feet per minute. Wings level, you are in position. Reynolds' voice commanded, crisp and precise. Elena nodded, even though he could not see her, adjusting the controls to match the recommended descent rate. The plane responded sluggishly, like a colossus being led gently down a hill. The speed reduced further, flaps deployed to stabilize the descent, and the massive jet started aligning perfectly with the runway's centerline. In the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Flight attendants silently gestured passengers to stay seated. A father whispered reassurance to his child, whose small hands were trembling over the armrest. Others clutched rosaries or prayed silently, hearts pounding in unison with the plane's every shudder. The subtle thrum of engines, the vibration of the fuselage, and the occasional creak of metal formed a symphony of impending landing, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Elena, final approach confirmed. Maintain speed, check instruments, flaps at 30 degrees. You are ready, Reynolds guided. Elena's hands moved over the yoke and throttle with a careful precision, as if each action were choreographed. Her focus narrowed, everything outside her immediate cockpit view faded. The white jet stretched in front, a massive controlled descent, flanked by the nimble Raptors providing guidance and assurance. The runway was now only a few thousand feet away, and every second felt like a lifetime. The wind currents buffeted the fuselage, turbulence dancing violently across the airframe. Elena kept adjusting, holding her nerve, each movement precise, controlled, deliberate. The fighter jets gave subtle signals, encouraging and correcting, almost like instructors in an invisible classroom of life or death skill. The landing lights grew brighter, reflecting off the wings. Passengers held their breath collectively, sensing the final moments approaching. Elena's pulse matched the rhythm of the descending engines. Sweat dripped down her temple, but her hands did not tremble. Every instrument, every warning, every subtle indicator became part of her consciousness as she guided the plane toward a perfect touchdown. The runway expanded beneath them like a giant gray river, rising fast as flight WX 407 descended in its final seconds before touchdown. Elena's breath was shallow but steady, her hands firm on the controls. The fighter jets, still flanking the commercial airliner, maintained an unwavering formation, their pilots fully focused on shepherding the massive aircraft safely to the ground. WX 407, you are clear for landing, wind 7 knots from northwest, came the call from ATC. The calmness of the controller's voice steadied Elena's racing heart. Copy on final, she managed her throat dry. The white jet roared forward, flaps fully extended, landing gear locked, engines humming with a controlled intensity. Turbulence rocked the plane again, stronger this time. The nose dipped unexpectedly, and a gasp escaped Elena's lips as she corrected sharply, raising the yoke and stabilizing the aircraft just in time. The passengers felt the sudden drop, Cries, gasps, and murmurs rose through the cabin, but Alina was locked in, focused beyond fear. "Easy, easy, don't fight her too hard," Captain Reynolds said through the radio, his voice softer now, almost like a coach guiding a student through the most critical performance of their life. The jet crossed the runway threshold. 30 feet, 20 tent. Alina read aloud instinctively, her eyes flicking between the altimeter and the runway markings. The wheels hit the ground, a deep thud, then another. The tires screeched loudly as smoke puffed around them. The heavy fuselage bounced slightly before settling fully onto the tarmac. The plane was grounded, but far from safe. The immense speed was still dangerous. "Reverse thrust gently," Reynolds reminded. Alina pulled the controls back, engaging reverse thrust. The engines responded with a thunderous roar, pushing the plane backward through the air, slowing them rapidly. The passengers were thrust forward in their seats, seatbelts straining, but then a sudden crosswind slammed against the right side of the plane. The jet swerved, the runway edge loomed dangerously close. The aircraft tilted slightly, and chaos erupted inside the cabin as passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled violently, a tray rolled across the aisle, a baby cried uncontrollably. Alina gritted her teeth and forced the yoke to the left, countering the wind. Her arms ached, her heart hammered. For a moment it felt as if the jet would slide off the runway entirely. Hold it steady," Reynolds commanded. She did. The jet steadied. The fighter jets soared overhead, pulling up into a protective orbit as they monitored the landing, their roles nearly complete. The speed dropped further, 120 knots, 95, 70, finally 40 knots, and then a slow, grinding halt. Silence heavier than sound filled the cockpit. Alina slumped back in her seat, breath trembling as relief washed through her. Her body shook not from fear now, but from the overwhelming release of tension she'd carried throughout the descent. WX 407, runway secured, emergency teams approaching. ATC reported, outside, the runway exploded into motion. Fire trucks, ambulances, rescue vehicles, and emergency response teams raced toward the jet with blaring sirens. Their lights flashed bright red and blue across the aircraft's glossy white surface. Inside the cabin, the passengers sat stunned. Some were crying, others laughing in disbelief, others praying, and many simply holding the hands of strangers they had never met before today. A flight attendant, tears in her eyes, picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Please remain seated." Her voice cracked, but it carried relief that spread through the cabin like warm light. In the cockpit, Alina unbuckled her harness and leaned toward Captain Hayes. He was still unconscious but breathing. She brushed her trembling fingertips against his wrist to check the pulse. "Hold on, Captain," she whispered. "We made it." The cockpit door opened as the head flight attendant entered, eyes wide and full of emotion. "Are we safe?" she asked. Alina nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavily on every muscle in her body. "Yes, we're safe. Outside, firefighters approached with hoses ready, checking the landing gear for overheating or damage. Medics stood by to board the plane as soon as they received clearance. The military personnel, coordinating with the fighter jets, exchanged final reports over secure radio channels. One of the Raptors flew low over the runway, offering a final protective sweep before peeling away into the sky with a resonant roar. An aerial salute to the bravery inside the white commercial jet. Emergency steps extended from the aircraft, vehicles positioned themselves strategically, the door opened with a hiss, and medics climbed aboard immediately, heading straight for the cockpit. Passengers clapped, cried, and hugged each other. A few looked out the windows and stared at the emergency crews with awe and gratitude. A little girl asked her mother, "Mama, did we almost fall?" Her mother held her close and whispered, "But we didn't, sweetheart." An angel was flying the plane. In the cockpit, a medic assessed Captain Hayes while another checked Alina's vitals. "You kept all 408 people alive," the medic told her with a respectful nod. "You saved an entire aircraft. Elena blinked back tears. She hadn't done it alone. The fighter pilots, the AC, the emergency crews, they had all formed a chain of survival. But she had been the final link. Outside, the sun began to dip low, casting a warm orange glow over the runway, the light of safety after the longest, most terrifying descent of their lives. But the story wasn't over yet. The world didn't know what had just happened, not yet, and something unexpected was about to unfold. The news of Flight WX-407's miraculous landing spread like wildfire. Television screens flickered with footage of the massive white jet, parked safely on the tarmac, surrounded by emergency vehicles. The world's media outlets were already broadcasting live from the airport. Social media exploded with posts praising the unnamed first officer who had saved all 408 passengers. Every channel seemed to be asking the same question: who was the hero behind this unprecedented act of courage? Inside the airport, passengers were finally allowed to disembark. Many moved slowly, still overwhelmed by the terror they had experienced moments ago. Some were crying, clutching loved ones. Others shook hands with flight attendants or silently mouthed words of gratitude to the pilots. News cameras captured the chaos and relief, while journalists tried to interview the stunned survivors. Elena Morales, first officer and now the central figure in the unfolding global story, stepped off the plane with a careful smile, still in her uniform, disheveled from the tense ordeal. Flashbulbs erupted as reporters pressed closer. The questions came fast, almost overwhelming. "Miss Morales, how did you manage to land the plane? Were you scared? Can you describe what went through your mind during those final seconds?" Elena paused, taking a deep breath, the weight of her experience pressing down on her. "I did what any pilot would do," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I focused on the procedures, followed instructions from air traffic control, and had the support of incredible fighter jet pilots guiding us. Everyone worked together to make this possible." Outside, the two F-22 Raptors that had escorted the jet soared overhead one last time, performing a low flyover as if paying tribute to the young pilot's heroism. Those watching live on television gasped as the jets executed a precise aerial salute, a final sign of respect from the military to the civilian aircraft and its extraordinary crew. Meanwhile, medical teams assessed Captain Richard Hayes. Miraculously, he was stable but had suffered a brief hypoxic episode due to an undiagnosed medical condition. The news added another layer of amazement. Had Elena not taken immediate action, the outcome would have been catastrophic. When he regained consciousness, he asked with a shaky voice, "Did we make it?" Elena smiled faintly, gripping his hand. "We did. You're safe now, Captain." News outlets across the globe broadcast the heroic landing as a defining moment of courage under pressure. Social media hashtags like #MiracleLanding, #HeroPilot, and #Flight WX-407 trended worldwide. Experts analyzed every frame, from the precision of Elena's control of the aircraft to the coordination of the fighter jets guiding her descent. Aviation forums were abuzz with admiration and awe, praising both the young first officer's skills and the calm professionalism of all emergency personnel involved. In the days that followed, the story evolved into more than just a tale of survival. It became a symbol of bravery, training, and teamwork. Airline officials held a press conference acknowledging Elena's extraordinary poise and skill. Elena Morales displayed exceptional courage, professionalism, and skill under extreme circumstances, said the airline spokesperson. "She is a credit to our profession and an inspiration to aspiring pilots everywhere. We are proud beyond words." Meanwhile, Captain Hayes issued a heartfelt statement from the hospital, expressing his gratitude. "I owe my life and the lives of 408 passengers to Elena. She remained calm, focused, and decisive when every second mattered. Words cannot express my gratitude to her, the fighter pilots, and all emergency personnel." In recognition of her heroism, aviation authorities fast tracked a series of awards. Elena received the highest honor available to civilian pilots, alongside commendations from the Air Force for her collaboration with military escorts. The fighter jet pilots, humble as always, credited the first officer's resolve for the safe landing. Back in the cockpit of WX-407, now quiet and stationary, Elena allowed herself a moment to reflect. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her exhausted but profoundly aware of the gravity of what had just occurred. She thought of the passengers, the terrified mother, the praying elderly man, the curious children. Every life aboard had been preserved because she had maintained focus, courage, and composure under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Later, she visited the air traffic control tower, where controllers who had guided her throughout the crisis congratulated her. Captain Reynolds, the lead fighter pilot, shook her hand. "You were amazing up there. You never wavered. That's why we all got home safely." The final acknowledgement came in a quiet moment. As the sun set over the runway, Elena watched the F-22s peel off into the horizon, their silhouettes glowing against the fiery sky. She realized that the victory was not hers alone. It was a testament to human skill, bravery, and cooperation. She had been the final link, yes, but she had relied on a network of professionals, each performing their role flawlessly. Flight WX-407 would never be remembered simply as another routine commercial flight. It would be remembered as the flight that tested the limits of human courage, coordination, and willpower, and ultimately proved that heroism is often found in the unlikeliest of places. Elena's story inspired millions around the world. Aspiring pilots shared their admiration, passengers relived the miracle in interviews, and military personnel quietly appreciated the perfect synergy between civil and defense aviation. In the heart of every individual who had witnessed or heard the story, the lesson was clear. Bravery, skill, and calm under pressure could turn near certain disaster into an extraordinary miracle. As the lights of the city shimmered beyond the horizon, Elena sat quietly, reflecting. She had faced the unthinkable and triumphed. In her hands she held not just the controls of a massive aircraft, but the lives of 408 people, proving that courage, true, unwavering courage, could soar higher than any jet, faster than any emergency, and shine brighter than any fear. The world had seen a hero in action, and Elena Morales, once just a first officer, had become a symbol of hope, skill, and human determination.